Glad tidings, rapscallions. Here we are once again for another installment or installment even of It's Okay to Suck and Start Again. And the whole concept is I'm just going to do a video like I'm almost like a monologue. I'm just talking to you, just you there, who may be thinking about, starting something new, a new adventure. It doesn't necessarily have to be music. It doesn't necessarily have to be a new job. You might just have come to a point with something in your life that you're like, oh, I'm just fed up and I'm bored, and is this it? Because the way I look at it is I am 44 this year, and I've probably got another, unless I'm lucky, probably another at least 25, maybe 30, 28 years to go. I can't see the retirement age being, below 70 by the time. That's if we make it that far. Current events all sort of, taken into consideration there, Rapscallions, you know what I mean? So basically, like I say, I'm not editing these videos. It is as is. And that's my whole concept is we can't edit our lives, can we? We can't, like the thing is, like you watch all these YouTube videos and other videos and it's like, well, editing out a little slip up here and there, and I don't want to do that. I want to be as raw and honest with you as possible, because that's what life is. I'm doing this just on an iPhone camera. I'm not doing it with any fancy equipment, and I maybe just use the iPhone tools that are on there to sort of edit it just ever so slightly, maybe just to sort of like go from long for this long, because I'm using my selfie camera, because I try to do it the other way around and I don't look like I'm looking at the camera. I'm like, ooh, I look over there. So basically, over previous episodes, what I've spoken about is my journey into making music and things like that. And like I say, you don't necessarily have to be making music. It is something, like I have to sort of I have to be a bit more obstructive and try and think about where other people may be, because sometimes some people have not had the hand holding and the pats on the back, or they may not, like I've failed so many times in life, but that's okay, because failure is all part of the learning process. You can't gain perspective and you can't learn recovering lessons and problem solving abilities without failing something. Like nobody who did anything worth doing didn't fail 100 million times. And I don't want to just keep reeling out sort of like cliches and sound like a walking talking meme, but the one thing that always sticks with me is the master has failed way more times than the apprentice has tried, and that's something that stuck with me. And another thing that sort of stuck with me is comparison is the thief of all joy, and that got me, those two quotes especially have got me through some very difficult times in my own life. So I'm so a little bit of background, if this is your first time watching this, like this It's Okay to Suck and Start Again series, then please do go to the first, hit that subscribe and like button, and sort of maybe just consider leaving a comment if you've started a journey and you want to talk about it, or you want to encourage somebody else to do the same. So I do want to build a nice community of people, of go-getters, do gooders, not necessarily do gooders, but people who want to do something in their life and do a little bit. I do try to keep these quite short, and I am very aware that I am a bit of a chatterbox and I do tend to ramble on a bit, you know what I mean. But that's kind of what's made me quite successful in my own business, because I've moved around a lot and I've worked in countless amounts of hairdressers and barbershops, and I've always become one of the busier professionals in the shop that I've worked in after a sustained amount of time. So being able to talk and communicate is something that I am quite good at. Probably one of my best abilities, if not my best abilities, to be able to talk to people of all different ages, and it's through barbering and hairdressing and watching and you know, studying psychology, that I've also sort of realized that, you know, society kind of has so many different kinds of people, but we all have to muddle on together on this big spinning rock that we call Earth in the world, you know. And I've lived with many people. I've also sort of done a lot of, you know, moving about. In fact, this is the longest I've lived anywhere outside my hometown consecutively come next month, and I've lived in this little town in Cheshire for the last 4 years come next month on the 18th. So, you know, it's through this as well, you know, all these little sort of little bits of the jigsaw have come together and made me think about, you know, what I can sort of bring to the table when it comes to, I'm not clout chasing or anything like that. I don't, you know, like you either like it or you don't. Do you know what I mean? You either like this. So anyway, enough of that introductions. I want to talk about my, you know, I kind of look at sort of, I've been writing quite a lot of lyrics in the last week or two, about a week and a half actually. And the main reason I don't tend to, don't really put a lot of effort into them, because I'm going to be very honest, I'm not a very good singer and I'm not a particularly great guitarist. But I'm also not going to tell you any fibs. I've been using Suno, which is an AI music generator. Now, you can, if you want, just go on to ChatGPT, put a subject matter in, and then, you know, ask it to sort of, then, and a style of music, and you can get ChatGPT to write you, or, you know, the equivalent of, and you can get that to write your music and, you know, make music. And I'm sure many people do that. I think Iran are doing it at the moment. Well, but that's for another time. We'll not talk about that right now, you know. But yeah, so basically, but what I've been doing is I've got my own music that I've made, you know. So whether it's something I've made on a DAW out of samples or I've made myself, you know, I've then imported that into Suno and give it a little bit of a prompt and asked it to do different things, and, you know, to varying degrees. Now, the one thing that I will say about Suno is, I just, you know, just for clarity, I'm under no paid. I've got 20 followers. Do you know what I mean? I've got 20 subscribers on this channel. It's not like they've come knocking on my door and asked me to, you know, promote them. But I'm just telling you something from a very honest standpoint about what I'm doing and how I'm using that to sort of create music and hopefully help me be a little bit more motivated. Because when you start hearing the lyrics that you're writing down and they're generated into songs, and you know, I'm not saying they're brilliant. I you know, I'm not. I think they sound pretty good. I'll not play that one. I'll play one that I wrote the other day, and it's just, you know, it's like a indie Britpop track that I made. But again, I just feel like it's all a little bit too clean for me. But it was just some words that I came up with. Well, we'll get there in a minute. Where are you? So, crikey. Right, so I'll even play you the original bit, and then I'll play the. So this is, you know, get ready to get your earplugs in. So this is me. Days have been for eyes. I couldn't be surprised, but you were just too much for me. Never saw you cry, 'cause those laser beams don't die. And I didn't know that you were a rocket too. I think I need to get my guitar looked at, or I need to at least practice more. Now, so take that into consideration, and then I run that through. No, not that one. So I ran that through through Suno. Asked it to make a Britpop. Excuse me. Asked it to make like a 90s style Britpop, indie. With laser beam eyes, I couldn't be surprised that you were just. It's not my favourite version of it. I actually prefer, it's a bit happy and go, you know, it's quite summery and a bit psychedelic. With laser beam eyes, I couldn't be surprised that you were just too much for me. I never saw you cry because those laser beams don't die, but I did. Anyway, so that's one of the songs that I've written over this last week or so, and I've just sort of put that. But you know, that's kind of giving me it's giving me more motivation to sort of make more, you know, write more lyrics, and then I can play with that, and then while I'm, you know, sort of learning to be better on the guitar or making music, and I can, you know, you can lift the stems off of there and you can put that back, I can put that through, so I can actually take the song that I've put in there, take it back, and then I can, you know, like I say, it's just something that I'm playing with at the moment. But what I want to talk to you about more so today is if I was to go back and do my whole learning journey again with music, I definitely would. I feel like before I discovered Ableton and producing music, I was like on a really strong trajectory learning the guitar. Now, I didn't pick the guitar up until I was like 38. So I've been playing it sort of 6 years. And to be honest, I'm not, you know, I'm nowhere near as good as I should be after 6 years because I'm not consistent with it. And that's kind of where I think to myself, if I had been more consistent and I'd have just kept going with it, but I've spread myself a little bit too thin because every now and then I'll go weeks where I'm barely playing the guitar, and then I'll just concentrate on production, and then another side of it where I'll realise that I've not played the guitar for ages, and I'll go and play the guitar for like a week, and then I'll start getting quite up there again, you know, skill levels. I'll learn I'll learn some songs, they'll start, you know, like some more sort of like intricate bits, and then I'll realise I've not done any production, so then I go back and do that again, and that's how I've flipped and flopped. So, you know, not even the master of all, you know, like the jack of all trades, just some jackass of all trades, really. Anyway, so basically, but it does give me a bit of an understanding of a little bit of a music theory, what chords work together, what chords don't work together, you know. And generally, if you want to learn to play the guitar, you can pretty much learn hundreds of songs just by learning 4 chords, 4 basic chords. You know, get yourself a capo, move that all over. So that's the kind of, you know, sort of like, but 15 minutes a day practicing. And like, I'll probably jump on the guitar after I've done this, but I live in a house share and I always feel a little bit inconsiderate if I'm sat there strumming away on my guitar, even though, you know, I don't think other people are quite as considerate in the house share sometimes, but that's not for now. So yeah, I would have carried, you know, I think like going back to that, I'd have carried on trying to spend equal amounts of time learning, but there's so much to learn when you're making a beat, and then you've got to sort of like work out, and I still, for all intents and purposes, don't know what genre I make. Like, obviously that's quite a Brit poppy track. You know, I'll play you another one that's, I've called this, because I've got a massive disdain with the So this one is about basically like the school system and the establishment and how we're all built to fail. And again, is a good segue to what I want to say about, basically, at the end of the day, I think a lot of our lack of confidence comes from the school system, to be honest. The fact that we're tested, on exams that make actually no sense. So for me, I think as I've got older, I realised I'm not an idiot. I'm not stupid. I just wasn't good at certain subjects at school. And those subjects that I weren't good at have played absolutely no part in my life. Do you know what I mean? There's some things that we learn at school that they make no sense. So, but because we fail and we're taught that failure is bad from such an age, that we worry as adults that everything's a test and excuse me. But in reality, failure, like I say, failure is part of the process of learning, because if you don't fail, you can't learn from your mistakes, and if you can't learn from your mistakes, you can't improve. And it's just having to sort of chop that sort of little, sand that bit of worry off about, we all worry about looking stupid, but who to? The one thing that I've always, said is like, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but your opinion doesn't pay my bills. Do you know what I mean? Like it might do if you start subscribing and following me on here. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe it may make me a bigger, YouTuber or whatever. But in reality, I don't hold. That's not why I'm doing this. Do you know what I mean? I'm doing this because I enjoy making content. Sometimes it's cathartic just to sort of air out things that I'm thinking, and you never know, somebody out there might be thinking round about the same way. So that's how things happen, and you build a community and things and a following. So as much as I'd love to be able to make content full time and music full time, as it stands, that's not it. So anyway, I've kind of gone off my point, which you will find that I do this quite often. I am, but like I say, I'm not editing these videos. I do try to, but I've just decided, probably decided about a few minutes ago, that I've been keeping them to 15 minutes and people haven't really watched them anyway. So I don't think there's any harm in going a little bit longer. So essentially what I was saying is, if I was going to start my learning journey again with music, I would definitely put more weight on learning more music theory. Now, it's not essential. A lot of producers and whatnot don't necessarily need to learn it or don't use it like I would, but I would really hone in on that, learning scales, and I am going to do all this, but I would learn scales. I would learn sort of maybe not how to read music, but how to understand it a lot better. But I have, for about the last month or so, been trying to learn more about that. Now this week I'm trying to focus on how to structure a good, it's all right just bleating out a load of lyrics, but you kind of need to sort of make them sort of like work in a nice way, where you got an intro and then maybe a bridge and then you go into the main or whatever, and then you get into a chorus and then they've made like verse 2. So I'm trying to sort of structure that a little bit better. I'm working on sort of, I've got a lot of inspiration for my lyrics. I've had a bit of a self-inflicted tough time with drink and whatnot, but also we've got past relationships, friendships that have failed. I've got loads to draw on when it comes to writing music. So I'm just at the minute I'm just playing around with a lot of styles, but I think as technology tends to do, it's moving very quickly, and it's giving us the ability, you either work with it or you work, you sort of get left behind. And I think that's the one thing that I would sort of recommend, is just you don't have to make like I say, you don't even have to learn how to produce music nowadays. You can just basically use AI for everything, and I'm pretty sure that people are making an absolute packet off of making AI music. But for me, it takes the pleasure out of it, it takes the fun, and the music lover in me. Like I say, for me, all this music sounds a little bit too polished, too clean, and I think that it removes the human element out of it, because we are, like, going back to what I said before, I don't edit these videos because human nature, we make mistakes, and you can't edit out mistakes in life. You can, you can take accountability and apologize for them, but you can't edit out those mistakes, because if we did, we'd all have perfect lives, wouldn't we? So that's kind of where I'm at with music in the moment, and I am sort of being quite conscious that this is now going over 20 minutes. So I do want to eventually get to a point where I can go live and I can talk to people and stuff like that. And that again, I do TikTok lives, and that in itself, you get some good people, but you get some douchebags in there as well, and that's just the rough with the smooth. But like I say, starting from scratch, I would put a lot more focus on, trying to equal out learning, focusing on the instrument that I chose to learn, but also understanding how music theory can make my music better, how I can, and I did, like I say, I flip-flopped. And during the, time during the, 2020 and not being allowed to go out, I had loads more time than I've got now. Now I'm working pretty much full time. I do a bit of youth work on a Monday, and then it's like gym, bit of life admin, then I come home and do this. You're like on my list of priorities, this video on a Monday is like up there with sort of waking up, I guess. But I'm always thinking, I'm always thinking about what to talk about, and sometimes I just think, like, I just want to make relatively honest, content, and maybe just sort of, maybe that works for some people, maybe it doesn't. Like, I just feel like we live in a world where everybody's living the best life, and that's not really what's happening. I think, like I've always said, if I was living my best life, you would probably not even hear from me anyway, because I'd be too busy living my best life, and I wouldn't be sat here. If I had the money to go and, like, I don't think I'd be documenting it, to be honest. I think I'd be, because it's kind of like the false window, isn't it? You tend to find a lot of people that are sort of like gurus and stuff like that, probably not as happy as you'd like to think. Like, it's very easy to fake a lifestyle on social media, and that is why I've got a curtain behind me and a crappy ring light that broke ages ago, and I'm using them because my life's actually all right. Like, I'm all right for money. I've got a good job. I make music. I do things that I enjoy doing. I'm not really a holiday person. I tend to just move to places, which is something else I'm considering at the moment, where to. But am I that miserable in where I am because I've been here or have I just got complacent? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video, complacency, and how, that can kill more dreams than anything else. We can get in our little comfy pants and stuff like that. But like I say, going back to the whole sort of me starting my music journey again, I'd double down on music theory. I would really, really learn all the tools in Ableton. I would, stick to one genre, just one genre, like, or two, instead of bouncing around and moving around. That's another key factor, I think. But we'll come back to this conversation next week for episode 7, and we'll talk about complacency and, consistency as well, because consistency and complacency can coincide with each other, but maybe in a good way or maybe a negative way. So I'm going to try and keep this on 25 minutes so that it's not too much for everybody to deal with. But thank you for joining me. Please consider hitting subscribe and like, and if you can't do that, or you would like, just share your thoughts in the comment section, that would also be really, really, really appreciated. And thank you very much for joining you. Toodle pip, goodbye, see you later.